Well, I tell you what, when you think about coaches in college football, there are coaches who win games and then there are coaches who change the game. Steve Spurrier has absolutely done both. When you think about him arriving at the University of South Carolina, he undoubtedly brought, I guess, a sense of swagger, you could say, but also a very different way of looking at college football that got Gamecock Nation super excited. Now there is a new book that really explores the man, the myth, the legend. It is called The Spurrier Effect, and we are really delighted to have the authors of this book in our studio today, Kevin Miller and Brent Silvia. Thank you guys both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So let me start with the title. I want to get the backstory and all of that first, but you talk about the Spurrier Effect. I mean, Kevin, that's a statement in itself. Tell me how you've landed on that title.
So honestly, through our conversations about the book, we probably threw out 20 different titles.
Yeah.
Right? It's one of those where it's like we don't know what we're doing really, but we know that we wanted to tell a story that, as Coach told us, was a good story to tell. And so through that process and a lot of back and forth with USC Press, who published the book, we ended up landing on the Spurrier Effect. And I think it fits because he had a profound effect on this program of basically just doing things that had never happened before here. And so I think the title works.
So, and Brent, in your mind, when you think about the Spurrier Effect, why do you think his impact and his legacy is really far beyond just a record of wins and losses?
So whenever he got to South Carolina, we were a program that had won 3 bowl games in over 100 years. And that was also one of the biggest things that was his motivation when he got here, was to do something at South Carolina that had never been done before. So whenever he got here, he knew that he could win at South Carolina. But one of the biggest things that he told Kevin and I was he had to change the perception of the way that people thought, the way that his own fans here would think about this program. And, you know, he knew that he had everything that he needed to do for South Carolina to be a successful football program going forward, but he just had to get everybody on board. And looking back 21 years later after he got here, coached his first year, then I'd say he did a pretty good job at it.
I would say so. I would say so. Kevin, and you're a sports writer. I mean, so you've been in the game for quite a while yourself. When you think about Coach Spurrier, I mean, obviously a lot of books have been written. I mean, he's a living legend. What about his story, his legacy, his career did you feel was untold and still needed to be shared?
I think, frankly, when you think of Steve Spurrier, a lot of people immediately think of the University of Florida. They think of the fact that he won the Heisman Trophy there, that he returned and really took a program. We all look at it now as a powerhouse, but they weren't when he got there, and he turned it around. And so a lot of people don't immediately think of the University of South Carolina. And I don't think that's fair to his legacy, and I don't think it's fair to the University of South Carolina. And I think what he accomplished here from 2005 to 2015 was something that was pretty special, and it's something that needed to be told. It was a good time, a great time even, and a time that fans around here had never seen before. And there's not been enough time spent telling that story.
Well, I tell you what, I just got the copy of the book a couple of days ago, and I've only had a chance to browse through it because one of my teenage boys picked it up. I'm like, where's the book? Where's the book? So I'm looking forward to reading the entire book, but I am so fascinated, Brent, by the story behind this book, because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you guys must have had a special connection to Coach, like you met Coach, like, you know, y'all have been lifelong friends, and this really came about in a crazy way.
It did. It did. So I'm a high school teacher at Blythewood High School, and I teach seniors, and they had gotten out of school 2 weeks early in May, as seniors tend to do. But so I'm bored out of my mind in my classroom, and I had conversations with my friend Kevin and told him, I said, let's write a book on Steve Spurrier. And Kevin basically said, how in the world are we going to do that? There's no way that we can do that. And I said, we could figure out a way to do it. And it dawned on me, I said, we need to probably get permission from Steve Spurrier before we do this. So I found an email online at his University of Florida email, and sent an email and
Send a cold email to the HBC.
Cold email,
Okay.
explaining what I do for a living. Hey, which if I would have read what this guy does for a living, I'd noticed that, hey, he's not an author, so why is he wanting to write a book on me? So told him, I said, I'm a coach, I'm a teacher, would love to tell this story because nobody's told this story before, and it's a great story. It's an important story in the history of the University of South Carolina. It's an important story in the Southeastern Conference. And I said, I would love to be able to do this if you would allow us to do it. 3 weeks pass, I've heard nothing. I'm figuring he's never going to see this email. I would be shocked if this email even gets checked. And 3 or 4 weeks later, my phone starts ringing on a Friday night. I'm putting my daughter to bed. It's probably 7:30, 8 o'clock. Laying her down, and my watch starts buzzing. I look at the suggested caller ID, and it says S. Spurrier. And
Crazy.
I frantically rushed back to get my phone, answered my phone, thinking somebody's either playing a joke on me or I need to answer this phone call one way or another.
Right.
So I answered the phone and pick it, whenever I said, I have no idea how I even said hello or how I even got that word out. But he starts talking. He says, first thing he asked me was how the golf season at Blythewood High School went because I was the boys' golf coach.
Wow.
Had about a 20-minute conversation, and that was probably 25 months ago. That was in June of 24. So that was 2 years ago, and Kevin and I and Coach Spurrier, that was the fun part about this was Coach Spurrier. It wasn't just he gave us permission to do it. It was he wanted to work with us on this, and we got to talk to a lot of special people. Got to work with Coach Spurrier every step of the way. Got to hear a lot of fun stories, and it's been a very gratifying process to where we are, and it's real now. So
It is. I mean, listen, like I said, I've gotten through a little bit of it and I'm looking forward to going through the rest. Kevin, when you think about not just the book, I mean, because that's an incredible accomplishment in itself, but the fact that you did get to work with Coach Spurrier and you think about the impact that he's had on this program. And there's so much to admire about him, right? He's got a certain swagger, as I said in the intro. I mean, just the legend that he is. He can be provocative at times. He says what he thinks and means what he says. What are the things that you admired most about him or that you learned about him through this process?
Yeah, I mean, so many things really, and some of them are things that you might immediately think of and be like, oh well, he is who he portrays in the media, like he does speak his mind, those type of things, but also that there's more underneath that visor, right? And Coach Spurrier absolutely adores his wife Jerry, and that was something that I think through, I mean, basically every conversation just kind of repeatedly over and over again was just how much he loved his wife and how important she was, not just to him, but to his work as a coach. She was, in his words, the perfect coach's wife. And if you really get into Miss Jerry's story, and she has her own chapter, that was a non-negotiable for Coach, that Miss Jerry had her own chapter. If you get into that, and you can see that she really played a much bigger role than I think most people realize here. And so that was something that was really cool to learn, because that he's a great football coach. That he's witty behind the microphone, but getting to see how he cares for his family, his wife, things like that was really, really special. And I think that was the one thing that stood out the most for me.
Well, and even the relationship that, you were putting your daughter down while he calls you, the little connection there in terms of family and him asking you about what you do. I think that Coach has a way of connecting with people, and family is everything to him. And Kevin, I think you're right, because I got to know Jerry a little bit while they were here in Columbia, and she was invested in that program. Like she didn't have to be in front of the cameras. She did so much behind the scenes that allowed him to be the incredible success that he was, but also she poured into those players.
Absolutely.
She did. And that was one thing that he still points out to us. And whenever I had conversations with Miss Jerry along the way, she talks about, those were her kids too.
Right.
Those were her guys. This is her school. She got her diploma. I mean, she got her degree from here, and she still claims the University of South Carolina as her school. And this place is very special to her. And she even said, one of the things that I remember having a conversation with her is when those players were hurting, she was hurting too. There's the stories of her famous cookies and all that.
Oh yes.
But, she had a very big role in this football program, and it was very important to Kevin and I and Coach Spurrier that she be a big part of this story, because she's as good as gold. And whenever you have a conversation with her, as you feel better about things after you get done talking with her.
Well, I'm getting all the feels just listening to you talk about her, because I think she definitely deserves all the flowers for everything that she's done, not just for that program, but in our community. And again, things that she doesn't need public recognition for, but she has made such an impact in ways that people don't know. The other thing, I'm not sure people know, I mean, in covering Coach Spurrier, I think people know he's good for a one-liner, you know what I mean? And he's got a great sense of humor. But were there things that you learned that made you laugh, that surprised you during the process of working with him on this?
I think so, and there were a fair amount of times where he would start saying something, and then he'd stop and he'd look at us and say, "Well, this one doesn't have to go in the." Yeah, so we got a lot of fun stories like that maybe we could share privately, but couldn't quite go into the book. But so there were some things like that, but there were also there were also some vulnerable moments when he talked to us about what the struggles were at South Carolina, what the difficulty was as things were coming to a close in 2015, and getting to hear his perspective on those things, I think was a really cool thing. And we don't dive super deep into the difficulty at the end in this book because this is a good story to tell, and that was the whole, I guess, the whole purpose behind writing it. But getting to get that little glimpse into this guy who, from behind the microphone, kind of comes off as a little bit bulletproof, right? Get some insight into, the human side of Steve Spurrier was special.
Brent, is there a story that resonates with you where you think in your mind, you know what, only Steve Spurrier could get away with that?
Whenever, not necessarily just, there's things that Steve Spurrier says that everybody just says, that's Steve Spurrier, whether it be
Right.
the Auburn Library catching on fire, both books burned down, and the shame was only one hadn't been colored in yet, or stuff like that.
Remember
The fun that he had with Dabo Swinney at Clemson, the rivalry that he had with Georgia. But the things that I remember the most about this is when people say that Coach Spurrier is still sharp as a tack. That's what people still ask us. And they say, is he still sharp as a tack? And whenever people ask about his sharpness, it is not over exaggerated. Whenever he can still recall exact moments in the games and what coverages teams were in whenever he was facing them, or whether it be somebody's stat line from 30 years ago in a game, I mean, he gets it to a T and down to the exact yard. And that's like whenever Kevin and I were having conversations with him, whenever he's just able to pull this stuff out of his mind, you understand just why he was such a good coach as far as being a gifted play caller, because his mind is that sharp. And one thing that I said whenever I was typing this was, whenever he played Alabama or whenever he played Georgia, whenever Carolina would beat him, it always felt like he was 2 or 3 steps ahead of his competition, and that's what made him special.
That is incredible. Kevin, when you think back on covering this program, before Steve Spurrier, was there really a belief that this program could consistently compete at the highest levels?
Yeah, I think that word consistently is
Yeah.
is the kicker there. There were moments, in the 80s, obviously George Rogers won the 1980 Heisman Trophy. 1984 was a special year. There was some fun in 87, 88. They won a bowl game finally in the 90s. Then Lou Holtz kind of, after it bottomed out, he kind of brought it back to life, but then it slid back down a little bit. So it was never a consistent belief around here. It was always, well, we're South Carolina, so it is what it is. Gamecocks are never going to win it big. And Steve Spurrier immediately challenged that perception. People around here, even today, some would believe in this thing called the chicken curse. I know you've heard of it. It's this idea that because of, potential conversations with politicians in the 1800s, that there's a curse on the University of South Carolina, and therefore the football team can't have as much success as they would like. And he's like, no, there's no such thing as a chicken curse. There's no such thing as that. We're going to win here. And we're going to win here, and we're going to do it in a way that convinces people that this is possible. We're going to instill belief within this community, within this state, and within this sport that the South Carolina Gamecocks matter. And he did just that.
And Kevin, when you think about, his legacy, right? I mean, obviously the wins, the swagger, the prestige that he brought to this program. I don't want people to also overlook the relationships that he had with his players.
Yeah. As unfortunate news has come about with Stephen Garcia lately with his cancer diagnosis. I talked to Coach Spurrier the day that the diagnosis kind of became public, and he actually had just talked to Stephen that day and Stephen's family. As you see on the cover, Connor Shaw wrote the foreword for the book, so we were very appreciative of that. And whenever you talk to, I had conversations with Marcus Lattimore and guys like that throughout the book, and you hear just how much respect and love that they still speak about whenever they're talking about Coach Spurrier. Some of these guys, 15 years after they played their last snap at South Carolina, they still understand just how special the football coach he was. And I think, kind of going back to Miss Jerry also played a big part in that, as far as, the relationships and, the love and care that they had for their players and this university and program.
And Kevin, when you think about, we talked a little bit earlier about, he always said what he meant, right? And he did not back down from that. But when you reflect, this amount of time later on his personality, do you think that ever got in the way of what he was trying to accomplish? Or do you think that was really more of what made him so effective?
I think Steve Spurrier's confidence spread to other people. I think if people were honest, it wasn't just the community that didn't believe that South Carolina could consistently win. It was probably the players on the team to a certain extent too. And he changed that, because when the head ball coach tells you that you can win football games, you don't have any choice but to believe that you can win football games, because he's going to look you in the eye and he's going to say it and he's going to mean it. And you know that if you've got that guy in your corner, you've got who I think is the greatest play caller in the history of the sport. You've got that guy in your corner and he believes in you, you can't help but to believe in yourself.
Absolutely.
And so I think that changed things on the field just as much as how good he was with a play sheet.
And how did that change for the fans? You know, what was the fan mentality before Spurrier and after Spurrier?
I think that the first thing that fans still felt guarded, but even in that first year, you beat Tennessee on the road for the first time. You beat Florida for the first time since the 30s at home. The next year they beat Clemson on the road. Then the next year they beat Georgia. So fans really started to buy in. And I think that the expectations for this program have changed ever since, before he got here, it was, let's just hope we make a bowl, because we would celebrate making a bowl game. And that was a big time event back before he got here. And then you win an SEC East, you go play for an SEC championship, and you're finishing in the top 5. And now you look at the expectations and the fans' expectations, and as well as the athletics program, their expectations for this program have definitely been elevated ever since before he got here, and now since he's been gone.
I'll tell you what, before we kick off football season, is a great time to pick up this book, and it's a great stocking stuffer to go ahead and grab it for the holidays. They got the big warehouse sale going on over there, so you can put a whole Gamecock package together with all the old Under Armour gear. But let me ask you this before we close out. When somebody picks up this book and reads about the Spurrier Effect, the one coach who transformed college football, Kevin, what is it, if you can pick just one thing that you want them to learn or remember about Coach Spurrier when they close this book?
I think I would want them to remember that Steve Spurrier genuinely loved and cared about the University of South Carolina, the football program, and its fans. It was something that, in his own special way, he always gave little hints throughout his time here, but he wasn't one that would just come out and make a bold proclamation about how much he loved people and loved the fans. But it's interwoven through every story in the book, I think. And I hope that the fan base understands that he wasn't just somebody who won some games, but that he won some games and it meant something to him because he did it for these fans.
And Kevin, what is one way, the biggest way, I guess, that you think he changed the culture of Gamecock Carolina football?
I think that whenever fans look back at this, like I said, just think about what your expectations are. South Carolina going into 2026, South Carolina fans are having expectations of making the playoffs. And before Steve Spurrier got here, if you would have told South Carolina fans that we would have expectations of competing for a national championship, I think that they would have all looked at you like you were from outer space. But now those expectations have been changed, and the culture's been changed, and the investment in the program by everybody's been changed.
Absolutely. Well, we'll give you one more look at the book here, The Spurrier Effect. I don't know which way to turn it, guys. Y'all can get, there we go. I'll give y'all a good shot there. Steve Spurrier made it clear once he came to South Carolina, he wasn't here just to participate. He came, in fact, to change expectations. So whether you love the swagger, laughed at the quotes, or the controversy that swirled around, there is little question that he has left an incredible legacy, and The Spurrier Effect takes a deeper look at that. Brent, Silvia, and Kevin Miller, we can't thank y'all enough. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a book that every Gamecock fan should pick up and get ready for game day. Fellas, thank you again. Such a joy talking to you. Enjoyed it so much, and we'll certainly enjoy the book. Y'all got to sign it for me before you. All right,
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.